Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Bible Summary Series. Today, we're starting in Genesis chapter 38. Around this time, Judah left his family and went to live with a man named Hira, who lived in Adullam. There he saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and Judah married her. Together, they had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. When grew up, Judah arranged for him to marry a young woman named Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord killed him. Then Judah told Onan, his second-born, "Go in and marry your brother's wife, and produce an heir for your brother." Onan knew the child wouldn't be his, so when he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his seed on the ground to prevent her from having children. But what he did displeased the Lord, so the Lord killed him as well. Judah then told Tamar, "Go back to your parents' home and remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you." But Judah was being dishonest with her. He had no intention of keeping his word because he feared Shelah would die as well. So Tamar returned to her father's house. The years passed by, and Judah's wife died. And after the time of mourning was over, he traveled to Timnah to his sheep shears along with his friend Hira, the Adullamite. Someone told Tamar, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." When Tamar heard this, she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, but she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought Tamar was a prostitute, because she had covered her face. He approached her and said, "Please, let me sleep with you," without realizing she was his daughter-in-law. "What will you give me that you may lie with me?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from the flock," he promised. "What pledge will you give me until you send it?" "What kind of guarantee do you want?" he asked. "Give me your seal and your cord and the staff that is in your hand," she said. So Judah gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant. Afterward, Tamar got up, removed her veil, went back home, and put on the garments of her widowhood once again. Later on, Judah sent the young goat with his friend Hira to retrieve his seal, cord, and staff from the woman. But Hira couldn't find her, and when he asked the men at the place, "Where is the prostitute who was sitting at the entrance of Enaim?" they said, "There's never been a prostitute here." So Hira returned to Judah and told him, "I couldn't find her, and the men of the place said, 'There's never been a prostitute there.'" "Then let her keep what I gave her," Judah said. "After all, I sent the young goat as we agreed, but you couldn't find her, and if you go back to keep looking for her, we'll be the laughing stock of the village." 3 months passed by, and someone told Judah, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the prostitute, and now she's pregnant." When Judah heard this, he was enraged. "Bring her out, and let her be burned to death," he commanded. But as they were taking her out to kill her, Tamar sent this message to her father-in-law, "The man who owns these things is the father of my child. Look closely. Whose seal and cord and walking stick are these?" Judah recognized the items at once and admitted they were his. "She is more righteous than I am," he exclaimed, "because I didn't give her to Shelah, my son, as I promised." After this, Judah never slept with Tamar again. Several months passed, and when Tamar went into labor, it turned out there were twins in her womb. One of the babies put out his hand, and the midwife took it and tied a scarlet thread around his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But then he pulled back his hand, and his brother came out first instead. "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How did you break out first?" So he was named Perez, which means breach, burst forth, or breakthrough. Afterward, his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and they named him Zerah, meaning to arise or shine. Meanwhile, in Genesis chapter 39, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. But even as a slave, the Lord was with Joseph, and he succeeded in everything he did as he worked for his Egyptian master. And Potiphar noticed when he saw how the Lord was with Joseph and caused everything he did to succeed. It pleased him, and Joseph found favor in his eyes. Eventually, Potiphar made Joseph his personal servant and put him in charge of his entire household and all of his possessions. From that time forward, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house and all of his fields because of Joseph. So Potiphar left everything underneath Joseph's care, and with Joseph in charge, he didn't worry about a single thing except for the food he ate. Now, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built man, and after some time, Potiphar's wife began to desire him, and she said to him, "Lie with me." But Joseph refused. "Look," he said, "with me in charge, my master doesn't worry about anything in the house. He has put everything he owns under my control, and no one here has more authority than I do. The only thing he has kept back from me is you, and that's because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God and your husband?" However, Potiphar's wife kept on persisting and pressuring him day after day. But Joseph refused to lie with her or even be alone with her. But then it happened. One day Joseph went into the house to take care of business, and none of the other servants were there. Potiphar's wife caught him by his cloak and said, "Come, lie with me." Joseph tore himself away from her, leaving his cloak in her hands, and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hands and fled outside, she called for her servants and cried, saying, "See, he has brought a Hebrew here to mock us. That man came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed, and when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak with me and ran out of the house." And so Potiphar's wife kept Joseph's cloak with her until Potiphar came home, and then she told him the same story. "That Hebrew slave you brought here came to mock me," she said. "But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak behind with me and ran out of the house." When Potiphar heard his wife's words and how Joseph had mistreated her, he was furious. He took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there Joseph stayed. But even in the prison, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him loving kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the warden. Not much later, the warden put Joseph in charge of managing all the prisoners and over everything that happened there. In fact, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and made whatever he did to prosper. Genesis chapter 40. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and baker offended him and made him angry, and he threw his two officials into prison, into the same place where Joseph was, in the house of the captain of the guard. The captain of the guard put Joseph in charge of the cupbearer and the baker, and he looked after them while they stayed there for quite a while. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker had a dream, and when Joseph saw them in the morning, he noticed they were sad and depressed. "Why do you look so downcast today?" he asked them. "We've each had a dream," they answered, "and there was no one to interpret them." "Don't interpretations belong to God?" Joseph said. "Please, tell me." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph what he had dreamt. "In my dream, there was a grapevine with 3 branches, and as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Then I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand." "This is the interpretation," Joseph said. "The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when that happens, please show kindness to me and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I've done nothing to deserve being thrown into the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream, and in mine there were 3 baskets of white pastries on my head, and in the top basket there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. But the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head." "This is the interpretation of your dream," Joseph responded. "The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and hang you on the gallows, and the birds will eat your flesh." On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, Pharaoh threw a great feast for all of his servants. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker and restored the cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph said it would be. Yet, even after all that, the chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph, but forgot all about him.